morning, church. I say this every week, but I'll say it again. If we haven't had a chance to meet, my name is Doug. I am one of the pastors here. And this morning, we're going to continue a series that we started all the way back in June called Summer in the Psalms. So if you have your Bible or Bible app, I'm going to invite you to turn to Psalm 18 this morning. Psalm 18. If you didn't bring a Bible this morning, it's going to be on the screen behind me. So don't worry, you'll be able to follow along. We're going to read a couple of verses out of Psalm 18 in just a moment. But before we do that, I want to tell you kind of what we're talking about. We're going to be talking about the fact that God is dependable even when life is unpredictable. That God is dependable, reliable, trustworthy, even when life is unpredictable. Some of us probably need to be reminded of that this morning. So again, we're going to be reading from Psalm 18. We're just going to read a couple of verses, but before we read those verses, I want to ask you a question. And it's an opportunity for you to kind of shout some answers at me. What's your favorite concert that you've ever been to? What's your favorite concert that you've ever been to? Just shout them out. Okay, hold on. Somebody said The Who. Okay. Led Zeppelin? Seriously? Golly. All right. Elvis Presley? Come on. I think I've asked that before. I think you've seen Elvis Presley twice. So I got to tell you this story really quick. And maybe I've told you this before, but my mother-in-law had tickets to go see Elvis when she was pregnant with my wife and her twin sister. Doctor put her on bed rest. She missed the concert, never got to see Elvis live. She still is a bit resentful towards my wife, I think, for that. Okay, Elvis. Who else? Steve Taylor? James Taylor. That's a favorite. Bob Seger, Journey, Prince, Rolling Stones, Santana, who? Gaither. Ah, yes. A Christian in the room. Good, okay. Yes. Mercy Me. Another Christian in the room. Okay, good. Hey, anybody else? Taylor. Who saw Taylor Swift? Dave Stegman. Actually, who has seen Taylor Swift live? There's a few of you I know who have. Yeah. Okay. Dennis. Who? Garth Brooks. Okay. Now, Jimmy, you've been in the music industry for a long time. Who's their favorite concert that you've ever worked at? What's the best concert?
Probably
Lincoln Brewster. Okay. Yeah. Good. Eddie, you've been in the music industry for decades. Who's the best concert you've been to? Oh, man. Anybody else seen Switchfoot live? Some of you are like, I have no idea who that is. They're an incredible band. They're one of my favorite bands to see live, too. Okay, so a lot of concert goers in the room and some classics for sure. So here's the thing. My wife and I love going to concerts. We don't go all the time because they're really expensive, but we try to go once a year. We try to plan a concert. And we really enjoy doing that. Our first concert together was Brad Paisley at the Staples Center because my wife is a country music fan. So that was me taking one for the team. We've also seen a bunch of different 90s bands like Weezer and Yellow Card and Goo Goo Dolls and U2 because we're old and we like 90s music. We even had tickets to see Aerosmith this coming December, and then Steven Tyler blew his voice out, and so they canceled the concert, which I was kind of bummed about. But there's one thing that my wife and I both hate when we go to a concert to see an older band that's been around for a while. It's this. We hate it when they only play their new stuff and they don't play their old stuff, right? Anybody had that experience where you've gone to the fair or you've gone to see a band that you grew up listening to and you want to hear the hits, right? And they kept saying, and this is off our latest album. And you're like, we don't care about your latest album. We want to hear the stuff, right? If I go see Guns N' Roses, I don't want to hear The General from 2024. I want to hear Paradise City and Sweet Child of Mine from 1987. Am I right? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't mind if an artist sort of mixes in some new stuff in with the old stuff. I don't mind. But I didn't save up for 6 months, right, to hear your new stuff. I want to hear the classics. I want to sing along at the top of my lungs with 10,000 other people who know every single word to your greatest hits. So, this morning, we're going to read one of King David's greatest hits, one of his classics. We're going to read a part of a song that King David wrote apparently as a young man in the middle of an incredibly difficult season of his life. And then many years later, as he reached the end of his life, as he got to the, about Mick Jagger, Keith Richards sort of age, he pulled out his harp, he dusted it off, he tuned it back up, and he sang this song again. It's a beautiful song. It's actually quite long, one of the longer psalms. This morning, we're just going to focus on 2 verses. We're going to read verse 1 and 2 together out loud. And so if you have it in front of you, or if you want to follow along on the screen, I'm going to invite you to read verse 1 and verse 2 out loud with me. Ready? Here we go. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. This is our scripture for this morning. I don't know about you and your life, but my life has had some ups and downs and twists and turns. Anybody else? Okay, I'm not alone. I've been lied to and lied about. I've been cheated on. I've had rumors spread about me. I've been betrayed by people I thought I could trust. I've been too broke to buy groceries. I've been too sick to get out of bed. I've gone through seasons of my life where it has felt like everything in my life is out of control, falling apart. Some of you know what that feels like. The one thing that I've discovered through those seasons of my life, and a lot of you have probably discovered this as well, is that God is dependable, even when life is unpredictable. Even when life feels out of control, even when you're not sure what's going to happen tomorrow, the next week, the next year, God is dependable, he's reliable, he's trustworthy, he's faithful. It's exactly what David discovered over and over and over again throughout his life. Just look back at the words that he uses here in just these 2 verses: strength, rock, fortress, deliverer. Rock, he uses it again, but it's a different Hebrew word. Refuge, shield, horn of my salvation, stronghold. Every one of those words, you know what they have in common? They all symbolize strength and stability and faithfulness. They all remind us that God is, in fact, dependable even when life is unpredictable. I want to go back and look at each one of those words that David used. The word strength, that word in the Hebrew means might, or help, or ability, like something that has the strength and the fortitude to be able to do something that needs to be done. The word rock, this isn't a little stone or a pebble that you would skip across a lake. This is like a massive rock that can't be moved and can't be shoved, and you could lean against it as hard as you want, but you can't get it to move. Safety, security, stability, something that doesn't move, doesn't shift, doesn't change. There's a reason that Dwayne Johnson chose that as his nickname, right? He wanted to be known as the Rock, right? Because it embodies strength. Fortress, a place of safety, a place of protection. A castle, a strong tower, a place to hide and find refuge against attack. Deliverer. This word here means a rescuer. Like someone who would run and jump in front of a moving train and scoop you up out of the way so that you don't get hit. A savior. He repeats, at least in English, the word rock, but it's a different word in the Hebrew. This word rock actually shows up again in verse 31 and again in verse 46. It's kind of the central metaphor of this entire passage. Here, this particular Hebrew word can literally be translated as mountain or strength. He keeps going, refuge. This is some place or someone that you can trust. Shield. Something big enough and strong enough that you can hide behind. It's actually the Hebrew word that can also be used to describe the scaly hide of a crocodile. horn of salvation. Some of you, if you have your Bibles open, somebody look down at the bottom. There's a little note next to that word, horn of salvation in the NIV, and down at the bottom there's a little note. Anyone want to tell me what it says? It says horn what? Yeah, that horn here symbolizes strength. That word horn symbolizes strength. And then finally, the word stronghold. Stronghold is it's a place of protection, a place of strength, a place of security. So over and over and over again, just in these two short verses, David is highlighting God's strength, God's dependability, his faithfulness. He's using metaphors like rock and mountain and fortress and stronghold to remind us that even when life is chaotic and out of control, that God doesn't change, that he's faithful, that he's reliable, that he's steadfast, that he's sturdy, that he's strong. But one of the things that makes this Psalm 18, really unique is not just the words that David used to describe God, although those are some beautiful metaphors that are really helpful to sort of sit with and reflect on. In fact, perhaps this week, maybe you might do that. Maybe you might sit with this psalm. Maybe every day this week in the morning, you might sit with Psalm 18, verse 2, and just each day reflect on one of those words. But not only do these words sort of give this psalm meaning, it's also the situation that David was in when he wrote this psalm that gives it some extra meaning. Because if you know anything about David's life, some of you have been around the church long enough, you've been in the scriptures long enough that you know a lot about David's life. But if you know much about David's story, you know that his life was completely unpredictable and at times completely chaotic. His life was filled with promise and potential early on in his life, as well as heartache and hardships. He had some unbelievably high highs and he had some devastatingly low lows throughout the course of his life. And throughout every season, the one truth that David seemed to hold on to no matter what was going on was this truth that God is dependable even when life is unpredictable. Now, if you're here this morning, you're joining us online and you don't know a whole lot about David's story, or maybe your memory's a little bit fuzzy on it, let me just fill you in a little bit because you really need to understand some things about David's life in order for this psalm to really pop. Let me give you an overview. The Bible first introduces us to David back in the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 16. I'm going to read a couple of passages in just a moment. In 1 Samuel, chapter 16, the prophet Samuel shows up at David's dad's house, a guy named Jesse, because God had sent him, told him to go and anoint the next king of Israel. So Samuel shows up where God tells him to go to Jesse's house. The problem was, first of all, the first problem was that Israel already had a king. So Samuel was kind of on this covert mission to announce or anoint the next king of Israel. Meanwhile, there's already a king of Israel, and his name was Saul. The second problem with this plan was that God didn't tell Samuel which of Jesse's sons had been selected to be the next king of Israel. Jesse had 8 sons, so Samuel was going to have to listen to God and figure it out. So Jesse had gathered all 7 of his sons together, 7 of them, and we read this in 1 Samuel chapter 16, beginning in verse 6. When they arrived, so they've gathered all the brothers together. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, that was the oldest brother, and thought, oh, this has got to be the guy. Surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, nope, not him. Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things that people look at. People just look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Verse 8, then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. That's the second son. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by Samuel, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? And he goes, well, they're still the youngest, Jesse answered. I kind of forgot about him, my bad. He is still out tending the sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for David and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." Okay, so we're just going back and looking at a little bit of David's origin stories to try to understand the backdrop for Psalm 18. So the very first introduction to David is filled with promise and potential and promotion, right? He gets selected. He's the youngest of the family. He's just the guy that the dad didn't even remember. Oh, yeah, that's right. I've got another son. I totally forgot about him, right? Any of you that are youngest in the family go, yep, that looks like reality. So they go and get him, bring him in. He gets anointed as the next king of Israel. So his origin story starts with potential and promise. He ends up getting selected by Saul, King Saul, to be a court musician, to play music, to sort of calm Saul's nerves. He's the guy who ends up, of course, killing Goliath, right? And with that, Saul begins to grow jealous of young David. We pick the story back up in 1 Samuel 18. In verse 5, we read this: that whatever mission Saul, the king, sent him on, David, who was still a young man at this point, was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army, so promotion. This pleased all the troops and Saul's officers as well. Continuing, when the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistine, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singing and dancing, with joyful songs, with timbrels and lyres. And they danced and they sang, and this is what they sang: Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. So you can already see where this is going to go. Saul was very angry. This refrain displeased him greatly. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands? Well, what more can he get but the kingdom? And from that time on, Saul kept a close eye on David. Now, if you know the story, you know that from that point on, Saul actually attempts to kill David on two separate occasions by throwing a spear at him. So verse 11 tells us that he was able to avoid getting pinned by the spear, avoided getting killed by Saul on two separate occasions. And unfortunately for Saul, the problem just kept getting worse. David's popularity continued to grow among the people and among the troops. And then, to make matters worse, Saul's own daughter ends up falling in love with this young upstart David. That's when Saul got an idea. He thought, I know what I'll do. Instead of killing David myself, I've got an idea. So he pulls David in. He says, David, I got a task for you. I got a job for you. I got an opportunity for you. I'm going to send you out, and if you can kill 100 of our enemies, the Philistines, then I will give you my daughter in marriage. Again, Saul figured that this way, he could get the Philistines to kill David, and he wouldn't have to worry about killing a war hero and sort of being, making an unpopular decision there, right? So the plan, if you don't know, the plan actually backfired. David goes out, not just kills 100 Philistines, actually kills 200 Philistines, comes back, proves it to Saul, marries Saul's daughter, and continues to grow more and more popular among the people. So finally, after Saul attempts to kill David again, David escapes out the window and spends the next 7 years running for his life. Saul and his men are chasing him into caves and into mountains. He's hiding among the Philistines. He's going wherever he can to try to avoid being found and detected and killed. And we don't know exactly when, but apparently it was sometime during this period that David wrote Psalm 18. We know this because of the note that comes before Psalm 18 in our Bibles. In other words, our Bibles actually give us the origin story of this psalm. If you have a Bible or even a Bible app in your lap this morning, you can go back and look. And I want you to notice, if you look at Psalm 18, that there's actually an introductory note right above verse 1. These are typically known as superscriptions. These superscriptions. Now, if you read throughout the Bible, you'll notice a lot of passages have little kind of italicized introductory notes. In most of the books of the Bible, these are added later by English translators to tell you sort of what this next section is about. But in the book of Psalms, it actually functions a little bit differently. These are actually part of the Hebrew text. These superscriptions that come at the beginning of many of these psalms contain information about the psalm. Sometimes they tell us something about the psalm's author or origin. Sometimes they tell us a little about the theme of the psalm. Sometimes they even tell us a little bit about the music or the melody that this particular psalm was originally supposed to be sung to. But these notes are actually part of the Hebrew text. In other words, they weren't added later by translators who translated your Bible into English. And this is important because the superscription at the beginning of Psalm 18 actually connects the dots between David's story, David's experiences, and when this song was actually written. Let me read it to you. This is the superscription that in the Hebrew Bible would actually be considered verse 1. It says this: "For the director of music, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord. He sang this song to the Lord, he sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hand of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said," and then the psalm begins. So I want you to notice when he sang this song, presumably when he penned, wrote, developed this psalm. It was after the Lord delivered him from Saul. So that means that the origin of this song actually began during a really difficult time of David's life. It means that after David had been selected from obscurity and then anointed as the next king of Israel, after immediately being sent back out to tend his father's sheep, after being picked to play music in King Saul's courts, after facing off against Goliath, after killing Goliath, after becoming a war hero, after marrying the king's daughter, after becoming the target of the king's jealousy, after having to jump out the window to escape his father-in-law. You thought your family had issues, right? After he was on the run from King Saul for 7 years, after he had lost his family, his home, his friends, his career, his comfort, his future plans. He was cold. He was hiding in caves. He was pretending to be insane while he was forced to hide among the Philistines. He was on the run, rejected, despised, confused. After all of that, he wrote these words: "I love you, Lord, my strength, my rock. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, my deliverer, in whom I take refuge, my shield. He's the horn of my salvation. He's my stronghold." Friends, in the middle of one of the most confusing and chaotic periods of David's life, David discovered that God is dependable even when life is unpredictable. And I don't know what's going on in your life right now. Some of you I've spent some time with, some of you I've talked to and had personal conversations with over the last few weeks. And so to some degree, maybe there are some things in some of your lives that I am aware of, but for the most part, I don't know what's going on in your life, but I am certain, this is what I know for sure, whether you're here in the room, whether you're joining us online, is that every single one of us need to be reminded of that truth, that God is dependable even when life is unpredictable, because every single one of us are facing, have faced, will face situations, circumstances, seasons, moments, weeks, months, years where it just feels like, how is this my life? How is this what happened? I made this choice. Why did that happen as a result of that choice? Or for some of us, it's like, yeah, I made that choice, and so that's kind of why I'm here. But we end up in these situations that are completely unpredictable, and we're reminded from the scriptures that God is dependable, that he's reliable, and he's trustworthy, that he's faithful, even when life isn't. What's fascinating to me, though, at least to me, about this song that David wrote when he was a young man, is that it actually shows up another time in the Bible. It actually shows up again in the Bible at the very end of David's life. So again, if we pay attention to the superscription that comes before Psalm 18, we go, oh, he wrote this after the Lord had delivered him from Saul. Okay, that was pretty early on in his life, right? Young man kills Goliath. He's in the courts. He's playing music. He gets chased. He gets on the run. He's on the run for 7 years. Probably still a young man at this point. That's when he wrote it, apparently. But it shows up again at the very, very end, like almost the last page of David's life. If you follow David's story, you'll remember that after Saul died, so after Saul had chased him around for all those years, Saul finally dies. David became the king of the southern kingdom of Judah. Then he became the king of the northern kingdom of Israel. He reigned over Israel for 40 years. His life was filled with both triumphs and tragedies, some of which were his own fault, including his affair with Bathsheba and his subsequent murder of her husband Uriah. He was confronted and corrected by his friend Nathan. His son Amnon violated his daughter Tamar. When Tamar's brother Absalom found out what Amnon had done to his sister, he killed Amnon. And then later after that, Absalom, David's other son, led a revolt against his father David. David again had to run for his life, this time from his own son. Later, David's men ended up killing Absalom, so he lost those two sons. His life reads like Shakespeare or a Greek tragedy. And after all of these experiences, after all the heartache and the heartbreak, as David reaches the very, very end of his life, as he reflects back on everything that he'd been through, the highs and the lows, the twists and the turns, 2 Samuel 22, which describes pretty much the end of David's life, tells us this. Tells us that David sang to the Lord the words of this song when the Lord delivered him from the hands of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul. He said, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation. He is my stronghold." These words sound familiar? The Bible's not just being redundant. It's not that the biblical authors forgot that they'd already included this somewhere else and didn't need to include it again. These are bookends of David's life when he sings this song. These are the same words as Psalm 18, verse 2, which means that the first time the Bible records David singing this song is when he was a young man and he was on the run from King Saul, and the Lord had delivered him from King Saul. The superscription above Psalm 18 tells us that that's when David first sang this song. But David sings it again at the very end of his life, just weeks before the end of his life. I find it incredibly beautiful that in spite of everything that David had been through in his life, and it was a lot, that as he looked back, again, over the ups and the downs and the twists and the turns of his life, he was able to sing these words, sing this song with certainty and conviction, the certainty and conviction of an old man who's like seen some things and been through some things and had some experiences and now has this sort of like chiseled outlook on life based on real life experience. He was able to sing the words of this song. When I picture David singing this at the end of his life in 2 Samuel 22, I hear it like Johnny Cash's voice at the end of his life, right? Just that rich, gravelly, kind of crackly voice, just filled with character of an old man who's been through some things. Because David was convinced that God was dependable, even when life was unpredictable. And friends, this truth isn't just for David. This is true for you and me. That God is faithful even when other people aren't. That God is steadfast even when life feels completely out of control. That God is strong when we feel weak. That God is trustworthy even if you're not sure you can trust anyone else in your life. That God is with you even in those moments when you feel completely all alone. That He will never leave you. That He will never abandon you. That He will never forsake you. That God is reliable and dependable and trustworthy and faithful and steadfast and strong and powerful and worthy of our praise. And He does not leave us. He does not abandon us. He is our rock, our refuge, our strong tower. And so this morning, what I'm going to ask you to do, I'm going to invite you to do, if you're physically able, would you stand to your feet? And what I want to do together this morning is I want to read Psalm 18, verse 2 together. Just verse 2. We're going to put it up on the screen. We're going to read that out loud together. And again, my encouragement is perhaps this week you bookmark it, maybe make it your screensaver on your phone, write it on a Post-it note and put it on the mirror. Somewhere sort of remind yourself. And perhaps this week, come back to this psalm. And maybe spend some time reflecting on the individual words of this psalm. Think about your own story. Think about the ways that God has been your rock in times when your life has been unpredictable. But this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to close by reading this together. And then Josh and Grace are going to lead us in singing the words of this psalm together. So I'm going to turn to the screen and we're going to read this together. Ready, begin. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold.